The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 37 years. Tom Bradley rolled out of bed, his joints creaking like the old wooden floors of his farmhouse. At 62, he still moved with the steady rhythm of a man who had spent his entire life working the land. The October air was crisp and cold, with that bite that told you winter wasn't far behind. Tom pulled on his worn leather boots and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen counter. His wife Linda was still sleeping upstairs, and he tried to keep quiet as he made his morning rounds. The farm had been in his family for 3 generations, and every morning, ritual was as familiar as breathing. The chickens were his first stop, clucking softly as he filled their water and scattered feed across the ground. The old rooster, Henry, strutted around like he owned the place, which Tom supposed he did in his own way. Next came the 2 cows, Bessie and Marge, who barely lifted their heads as he checked their water trough. It was when Tom was walking toward the hay barn that he first heard it, a sound so faint he almost thought he was imagining things. He stopped walking and listened carefully. There it was again, a soft whimpering, like a wounded animal. Tom had been around animals his whole life. He knew the difference between a cat in distress and a dog that was hurt. This sound was different. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, though he couldn't quite say why. He followed the sound to the old hay barn, the one they didn't use much anymore since building the new storage facility closer to the house. The wooden door was slightly open, which was strange because Tom always made sure everything was locked up tight before going to bed. The whimpering got louder as he approached. Tom's heart started beating faster, and his grip tightened on the flashlight. In all his years on the farm, he had never felt this kind of nervous energy. Something was very wrong. He pushed the barn door open slowly, the old hinges creaking in protest. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating hay bales and old farm equipment. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. Then the light caught something in the far corner that made him freeze. A person was huddled against the wall, wrapped in what looked like an old blanket. Tom could see long, dark hair and pale skin. Whoever it was seemed to be shaking either from cold or fear or both. "Hello?" Tom called out softly, not wanting to startle them. "Are you okay?" The figure looked up, and Tom saw it was a young woman probably in her early 20s. Her eyes were wide with terror, the kind of fear that goes bone deep. She pressed herself further against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the wood itself. "It's okay," Tom said, taking a slow step forward. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Tom. This is my farm." The woman's eyes darted around the barn like she was looking for an escape route. When Tom took another step closer, she found her voice. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please don't touch me." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. There was something in her voice, a desperation that spoke of terrible things. He had heard that same tone once before, many years ago, when his neighbor's daughter had been attacked walking home from school. It was the voice of someone who had been hurt in ways that went beyond physical pain. Tom stopped moving immediately and raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't touch you," he said gently. "I promise. But you're hurt, aren't you? You need help." The woman pulled the blanket tighter around herself, and that's when Tom caught a glimpse of what was underneath. What he saw made his blood run cold and his stomach turn. There were marks on her arms, dark bruises in the shape of fingerprints. Her clothes were torn and dirty, like she had been running through the woods for hours. But it was her wrists that made Tom's hands clench into fists. There were deep, angry marks around them, the kind that came from being tied up for a long time. These weren't fresh injuries either. Some of the scars looked old, like they had healed and been reopened multiple times. Tom had to take a deep breath to keep his voice steady. "How long have you been here?" he asked. I don't know," she whispered. "I was running. I couldn't run anymore." "Running from what?" Tom asked, though he was starting to fear he already knew the answer. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. She just stared at him with that terrified look, like she was waiting for him to hurt her too. Tom's mind was racing. This wasn't just someone who had gotten lost or was looking for shelter. This was someone who had been through something terrible, something that had left both physical and emotional scars. The way she flinched when he moved, the way she begged him not to touch her, the marks on her body. It all painted a picture that made him sick to his stomach. "Listen to me," Tom said, crouching down to be at her eye level but keeping his distance. "I need to call someone to help you, the police or an ambulance or both. You're safe now, but you need help." "No," she said quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No police. They'll find me. They'll take me back." Tom felt his heart sink. "Who will take you back? Who did this to you?" The woman just shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. She looked so young, probably not much older than his own daughter who lived in the city with her family. The thought of someone hurting a person this young, this innocent, made anger burn in Tom's chest. "Okay," he said softly. "No police right now, but I need to get my wife. She's a nurse. She can help with those injuries." The woman considered this for a moment, then nodded slightly. Tom stood up slowly, his knees protesting after crouching for so long. "I'm going to walk backward to the door," he said. "I'll be right back with Linda. Don't go anywhere, okay? You're safe here." As he backed toward the barn door, Tom's mind was already working on what needed to happen next. This woman had clearly escaped from something horrible, and whoever had hurt her was probably looking for her. The marks on her body told a story of prolonged captivity and abuse. This wasn't a random crime. This was something organized, something planned. Tom had lived in this quiet rural area his whole life. Crime was usually limited to the occasional theft or bar fight on Saturday nights. But what he had seen in that barn suggested something much darker was happening in his peaceful community. He reached the barn door and looked back one more time. The woman was still huddled in the corner, watching him with fearful eyes. "I'll be right back," he promised. "You're safe now." As Tom hurried toward the house, his flashlight beam dancing across the familiar yard, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to change forever. Whatever had happened to that young woman, whoever had hurt her, it was bigger than anything their small town had ever faced. He thought about Linda still sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that their morning routine was about to be shattered by the reality of human evil. He thought about their quiet neighbors, their safe community, their simple life. All of that felt different now, like a thin veneer that had been stripped away to reveal something much darker underneath. Tom reached the back door of his house and paused for a moment, his hand on the doorknob. Once he woke Linda, once they started making calls, there would be no going back. Their farm would become part of something much bigger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. But looking back toward the barn where a terrified young woman was waiting for help, Tom knew there was no choice. Some things were more important than keeping life simple and quiet. Some things demanded action, no matter how uncomfortable or dangerous it might be. He opened the door and stepped into his house, ready to wake his wife and start a chain of events that would change everything. Linda Bradley had been a nurse for over 30 years, and she thought she had seen everything. But when her husband Tom gently shook her awake at 5 in the morning, his face pale and worried, she knew something was seriously wrong. "Linda, I need you to get dressed and come with me to the barn," Tom said quietly. "There's a young woman there and she's hurt. She's hurt bad." Linda was already reaching for her clothes before Tom finished speaking. Years of emergency nursing had taught her to move fast when someone needed help. She grabbed her medical bag from the closet, the one she kept stocked with basic supplies for farm emergencies. "What happened?" she asked as they walked quickly across the yard. "I don't know yet," Tom replied. "But Linda, she's been through something terrible. She's scared to death, and the marks on her body." He trailed off, shaking his head. Linda could see the barn ahead, the door still slightly open where Tom had left it. As they got closer, she could hear soft crying coming from inside. Her nurse instincts kicked in, and she felt that familiar calm focus that came when someone needed her help. "Let me go in first," Linda said softly as they reached the door. "Sometimes women feel more comfortable with another woman." Tom nodded and handed her the flashlight. Linda pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. She could see the young woman in the corner, still wrapped in the old blanket, still crying quietly. "Hi there," Linda said in the gentle voice she used with frightened patience. "My name is Linda. I'm a nurse and I'm here to help you." The woman looked up, and Linda felt her heart break. The girl couldn't be more than 25, with long brown hair that was tangled and dirty. Her face was thin, like she hadn't been eating well, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. "Tom told me you're hurt," Linda continued, setting her medical bag down but not approaching too quickly. "I'd like to take a look at those injuries if you'll let me." The woman wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Are you really a nurse?" she asked in a small voice. "I am," Linda said. "I work at the county hospital, have for 30 years. I've helped a lot of people, and I'd like to help you too." The woman studied Linda's face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she could be trusted. Finally, she nodded slightly. Linda moved closer slowly, the way she might approach a frightened animal. When she was close enough, she could see the full extent of the woman's injuries. What she saw made her gasp. The bruises on the woman's arms were in various stages of healing, from deep purple to yellow-green. There were rope burns around her wrists and ankles that looked infected. Her clothes were torn and filthy, and Linda could see more bruises on her legs and shoulders. "Oh, honey," Linda whispered, her professional composure cracking slightly. "What did they do to you?" The woman's eyes filled with fresh tears. "My name is Katie," she said quietly. "I've been gone for a long time." "How long?" Linda asked gently, opening her medical bag and pulling out supplies to clean the infected wounds. "I think 18 months, Katie said, uncertainty in her voice. "Maybe more. It's hard to keep track when you never see sunlight." Linda's hands stilled on her medical supplies. 18 months. This wasn't a recent kidnapping or assault. This was something much worse, something that had gone on for over a year. "Katie," Linda said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you anymore. But I need to know, were you being held against your will?" Katie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "There were others too, girls and some boys. They kept us in different places, moved us around. I only escaped because the van broke down and they left me alone for a few minutes." Linda felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't just kidnapping. This sounded like human trafficking, something she had only read about in nursing journals and news articles. She had never imagined it could happen in her quiet rural community. "How many others?" Linda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "I don't know," Katie said. "They kept us separated most of the time, but I saw maybe 15 or 20 different people over the months. Some were there when I arrived, some came later. Some disappeared." The way Katie said disappeared made Linda's blood run cold. She had worked in emergency medicine long enough to know what that probably meant. "Katie, I need to clean these wounds," Linda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Some of them look infected, and that can be dangerous if we don't treat it." Katie nodded and slowly unwrapped the blanket from around her shoulders. What Linda saw underneath made her close her eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. The poor girl's body was covered in scars and bruises, some old and some new. It looked like she had been systematically abused for months. Linda worked quietly, cleaning and bandaging the worst of the wounds. Katie winced, but didn't cry out, like she was used to pain. That broke Linda's heart more than anything else. "Katie," Linda said as she worked, "we need to call the police. What happened to you? What's happening to those other people? The authorities need to know." "They said they had people in the police," Katie whispered. "They said if I ever tried to escape, their friends would bring me right back." Linda paused in her bandaging. "That might be true in some places, but not here. I know the sheriff personally. He's a good man, and he has good people working for him. They'll protect you." Katie looked uncertain. "What if they find me again?" "They won't," Linda said firmly. "I promise you we won't let that happen." As Linda finished treating Katie's wounds, she listened to the young woman's story. Katie had been living in a city 3 states away, working at a coffee shop and going to community college part-time. She had answered an ad for what seemed like a legitimate job opportunity, helping with elderly care in a rural area. When she showed up for the interview, she was drugged and woke up in a windowless room. From there, her nightmare began. She was moved between different locations, sometimes staying in basements, sometimes in abandoned buildings, sometimes in what looked like normal houses from the outside. The people who held her weren't just random criminals. They were organized, with different people handling different parts of the operation. Some transported the victims, some guarded them, some handled the business side of things that Katie didn't want to describe in detail. They had a whole system, Katie explained, her voice getting stronger as she talked. They knew how to keep people hidden, how to move them without being caught. They had fake documents, safe houses, people who would lie for them. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't some small-time criminal operation. This was something big, something professional, something that had probably been going on for years without anyone knowing. "How did you finally escape?" Linda asked. Katie's eyes got a faraway look. "They were moving me to a new location. The van broke down on a back road maybe 10 miles from here. One of the guards went to get help, and the other one fell asleep. I managed to get out of my restraints and run." She looked down at her torn clothes and bare feet. "I ran through the woods all night. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. When I saw your barn, I thought maybe I could hide until morning and figure out what to do next." Linda finished bandaging the last of Katie's wounds and sat back. The young woman looked a little better now that she was cleaned up and treated, but Linda could see the deep emotional trauma in her eyes. This was going to take more than medical treatment to heal. "Katie," Linda said gently, "I need to ask you one more question. Do you remember anything about where they were keeping you? Any landmarks, road signs, anything that might help find the others?" Katie thought for a moment. "The last place where I escaped from, it was an old warehouse or factory. I could see a water tower in the distance with some kind of logo on it, and there was a railroad track nearby. I could hear trains at night." Linda nodded. That was something the police could work with. In their rural area, there weren't that many abandoned industrial buildings near railroad tracks. Tom appeared in the doorway of the barn, carrying a thermos of hot coffee and some of Linda's homemade biscuits. Katie flinched when she saw him, but Linda noticed she didn't panic like she had earlier. "It's okay," Linda said. "Tom's one of the good ones. He found you, remember?" Katie nodded and accepted the coffee gratefully. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around the warm cup. "Katie," Tom said quietly, "I need to make some phone calls. The sheriff, maybe the FBI. What happened to you? What's happening to those other people? It has to stop." Katie looked scared again, but she nodded. "I know, I'm scared they'll find me." "They won't," Linda said firmly. "We won't let them. And Katie, you're the first person who's escaped from these people. Your information could save all those other victims." For the first time since they found her, Katie smiled slightly. It was a sad, broken smile, but it was a start. "Okay," she said quietly. "Make the calls." As Tom headed back toward the house to contact the authorities, Linda stayed with Katie in the barn. The sun was starting to come up, casting long shadows across the hay bales. It should have been a peaceful morning on the farm, but Linda knew their lives had just changed forever. Looking at this brave young woman who had survived 18 months of hell and still found the courage to help save others, Linda felt a mixture of. Sheriff Beth Rodriguez had been in law enforcement for 20 years, but the phone call from Tom Bradley at 6:30 that morning was unlike anything she had ever received. As she listened to him describe finding a young woman who claimed to be a victim of human trafficking, Beth felt her stomach drop. "Tom, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Beth said, already reaching for her uniform. "Don't let anyone else on your property until I get there. Don't post anything on social media. If this is what it sounds like, we're dealing with very dangerous people." Beth lived only 15 minutes from the Bradley farm, but it felt like the longest drive of her career. Human trafficking was something she had studied in police training, but she never thought she would encounter it in her quiet, rural county. Their biggest crimes were usually drunk driving and domestic disputes. When she arrived at the farm, Tom met her at the front door. His face was grim, and Beth could see the worry lines that hadn't been there the last time she saw him at the county fair. "She's in the barn with Linda," Tom said. "Sheriff, what this girl has been through, it's worse than anything I could have imagined." Beth followed Tom across the yard to the old hay barn. As they walked, he filled her in on what Katie had told them about being held for 18 months and the organized nature of her captors. Inside the barn, Beth got her first look at Katie. Even cleaned up and bandaged, the young woman bore clear signs of prolonged abuse. But it was the fear in her eyes that hit Beth the hardest, the kind of terror that came from months of trauma. "Hi, Katie," Beth said gently, sitting down on a hay bale across from her. "I'm Sheriff Rodriguez. Tom and Linda called me because they're worried about you and they want to make sure you're safe." Katie studied Beth's face carefully. "Are you really the sheriff?" Beth showed her badge and identification. "I am. And I want you to know that everything you tell me will be kept confidential until you're ready to talk to other people. Right? Now my only job is to make sure you're safe." Over the next hour, Katie slowly told Beth her story. The sheriff took careful notes, asking gentle questions to fill in details. What emerged was a picture of a sophisticated criminal organization that had been operating right under their noses. "Katie," Beth said, when the young woman finished talking, "the place where you escaped from, you mentioned a water tower and railroad tracks. Can you remember anything else about the area?" Katie closed her eyes, concentrating. "There was a sign on the road, something about a grain elevator, and I remember passing a truck stop with a big blue sign on the way there." Beth felt a chill of recognition. She knew exactly where Katie was describing. It was only about 12 miles from where they were sitting. The Henderson Grain Company had been closed for 3 years, and the abandoned buildings had been vandalized multiple times. She had never thought to check if anyone was actually using them. "Katie, I need to ask you something important," Beth said. "Are you willing to help us find the other victims? I know it's scary, but your information is the only chance those other people have." Katie was quiet for a long moment, tears rolling down her cheeks. "If I help you, and they find out, they'll kill me. They told us what happened to people who tried to escape. I understand you're scared," Beth said, "but we have resources to protect you, and every day we wait is another day those other people are suffering." Katie nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Beth stood up and pulled out her phone. "First, I'm going to call the FBI. This is bigger than what our department can handle alone. Then we're going to need you to work with a sketch artist to describe the people who held you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. FBI agent Diana Walsh arrived from the state capitol with a team of specialists. The Bradley farm became an impromptu command center, with agents setting up equipment in the living room while Katie worked with a forensic artist in the kitchen. Agent Walsh was a serious woman in her 40s, who specialized in human trafficking cases. She listened to Katie's story with the focused attention of someone who had heard similar accounts before. "Katie, based on what you're telling me, this sounds like a Tier 1 trafficking operation," Agent Walsh explained. "These aren't street-level criminals. They have significant resources, multiple locations, and probably connections in legitimate businesses." She showed Katie a map of the region. "I need you to think carefully about every place they took you. Even if you were blindfolded or drugged, any detail could help us locate the other victims." Katie studied the map, pointing to several areas where she thought she might have been held. As she talked, Agent Walsh's team was already analyzing the information and cross-referencing it with other trafficking cases in the region. "Sheriff Rodriguez," Agent Walsh said privately, "we need to move fast. If this organization is as sophisticated as it sounds, they'll realize someone is missing soon. When they do, they'll either move the other victims or—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Beth understood perfectly. "What's our next step?" Beth asked. "We need surveillance on that grain elevator Katie described. If that's really one of their locations, we might be able to confirm it and then plan a coordinated rescue operation." Within 2 hours, a surveillance team was in position near the abandoned Henderson Grain Company. Using high-powered cameras and listening equipment, they began monitoring the site for any signs of activity. Meanwhile, Katie continued working with the FBI team, providing descriptions of her captors and details about how the operation worked. She described a hierarchy where different people handled different aspects of the business: recruitment, transportation, security, and what Agent Walsh grimly referred to as client services. They had a whole system for breaking people down, Katie explained, her voice getting stronger as she talked. They would separate friends or family members who were taken together. They would move us frequently so we never felt settled anywhere. And they had ways of punishing people who caused trouble that made everyone else too scared to try anything. Agent Walsh nodded grimly. That's consistent with other trafficking operations we've investigated. The psychological control is often more effective than physical restraints. As the afternoon wore on, the surveillance team reported their first significant finding. There was definitely activity at the grain elevator site. They had observed several vehicles coming and going, including a van that matched Katie's description of the one she escaped from. "We have them," Agent Walsh said quietly to Beth. "But now comes the hard part. We need to coordinate a rescue operation that saves the victims without giving the traffickers time to harm them or escape." Beth felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In her 20 years of police work, she had never been involved in anything this serious. The lives of potentially dozens of people hung in the balance. "What do you need from my department?" Beth asked. "Complete secrecy for starters," Agent Walsh replied. "If word of this gets out, the traffickers will disappear and take the victims with them. I also need your local knowledge: back roads, alternate routes, places they might try to hide." Redeck. Evening approached. Katie was moved to a safe house in the county seat. She would be under constant protection until the operation was complete. Before she left, she pulled Beth aside. "Sheriff," Katie said quietly, "there's something else. Some of the guards talked about having people on the inside. Police, maybe even judges. They said they had protection." Beth felt her blood run cold. "Did they mention any names?" Katie shook her head. "No, but they acted like they weren't worried about getting caught, like they had done this before and never faced consequences." After Katie left, Beth sat in her patrol car outside the Bradley farm, thinking about what the young woman had said. The idea that there might be corruption in local law enforcement was devastating, but it would explain how such a large operation could run undetected for so long. She pulled out her phone and called Agent Walsh. "Diana, we have a problem. Katie thinks they might have people on the inside." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That complicates things," Agent Walsh said finally. "We'll have to limit the number of local officers who know about the operation." "What about my deputies?" Beth asked. "I've worked with these people for years. I trust them with my life." "I'm sure they're good people," Agent Walsh replied, "but we can't take any chances. Too many lives are at stake." As Beth drove home that evening, her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. Tomorrow, they would begin the most important operation of her career. The evidence was clear. The surveillance was in place and they had a brave witness willing to testify. But the stakes couldn't be higher. If they succeeded, they would save dozens of victims and break up a major criminal organization. If they failed, those victims might disappear forever. And Katie's courage in coming forward would have been for nothing. Beth thought about Tom and Linda Bradley, whose quiet morning routine had been shattered by the discovery of human evil on their doorstep. She thought about Katie, a young woman who had survived 18 months of hell and still found the strength to help save others. Most of all, she thought about the other victims still being held captive, waiting for rescue that might never come if they made even one mistake in the operation ahead. The command center was set up in an abandoned office building, 20 miles from the grain elevator. FBI agent Diana Walsh looked at the bank of monitors showing surveillance feeds from 6 different locations across 3 states. After 72 hours of intensive investigation, they had mapped out the trafficking network's entire operation. "Listen up, everyone," Agent Walsh addressed the joint task force of FBI agents, local police, and sheriff's deputies. "We've identified 7 active sites where victims are being held. We have confirmation of at least 19 people currently in captivity, with possibly more we haven't located yet. Sheriff Beth Rodriguez studied the detailed maps spread across the conference table. What had started as one young woman's escape had uncovered a criminal enterprise that stretched across state lines. The organization was even more sophisticated than they had initially realized. The operation works like this, Agent Walsh continued, pointing to a flowchart on the whiteboard. They recruit victims through fake job advertisements and modeling scams. The victims are processed at a central location, then distributed to various sites depending on their intended use. Beth felt sick thinking about what that meant. These weren't just criminals. They were predators who had turned human suffering into a business model. Katie's information led us to the grain elevator, which appears to be their main processing center, Agent Walsh said. Our surveillance shows significant activity there. Vehicles arriving at night, multiple people being moved in and out of the buildings. Detective Mike Thompson from the state police raised his hand. What's our biggest challenge going to be? Coordination, Agent Walsh replied immediately. We need to hit all 7 locations simultaneously. If we take down one site and the others get word, they'll either move the victims or... She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The past 3 days had been a masterclass in modern investigation techniques. Katie had worked with specialists to create detailed profiles of her captors, and her descriptions had been matched against criminal databases. The results were sobering. Several of the traffickers had long criminal histories and connections to organized crime. We've identified the leadership structure, Agent Walsh said, putting photos on the board. At the top is Vincent Kozlov, a 45-year-old with connections to international trafficking networks. Below him are regional managers who oversee different aspects of the operation. Beth studied the photos. These people looked ordinary, like they could be anyone's neighbors or co-workers. That was perhaps the most disturbing part. Evil often wore a normal face. What about the corruption angle? Beth asked. Katie mentioned they had inside protection. Agent Walsh's expression grew grim. We've been investigating that separately. We found evidence of payments to at least 3 people in positions of authority, 1 county clerk, 1 state trooper, and someone in the prosecutor's office in the next county over. The room fell silent. The idea that some of their own colleagues had been bought off by criminals was a betrayal that cut deep. That's why we've kept this operation compartmentalized, Agent Walsh continued. Only the people in this room know the full scope of what we're planning. Over the next hour, they went through the detailed plan for the coordinated raids. Each team was assigned specific locations and objectives. The timing had to be perfect. They would strike at 4 a.m. when the sites would be minimally staffed, but the victims would still be present. Remember, Agent Walsh emphasized, our primary objective is victim rescue. We need these people alive and safe. Arrests are secondary. Beth was assigned to lead the team hitting the grain elevator, the most important target since it appeared to be the organization's hub. Her team included FBI agents, state police, and 2 of her most trusted deputies. That evening, as teams moved into position around their assigned targets, Beth called her husband to tell him she would be working late. She couldn't give him details, but she needed to hear his voice before going into what could be the most dangerous operation of her career. Be careful out there, he said, and she could hear the worry in his voice even though he didn't know what she was facing. I will, she promised. I love you. At 3:45 a.m., Beth crouched behind an abandoned truck with her team, watching the grain elevator through night vision goggles. The building looked deserted from the outside, but their thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures inside. All teams report status. Agent Walsh's voice crackled through their radios. One by one, the teams at the other 6 locations confirmed they were in position. Beth looked at the faces of her team members, good people who had signed up to protect and serve, now facing something none of them had ever imagined in their quiet community. Alpha team ready, Beth reported. Execute, 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 Agent Walsh commanded. Beth's team moved swiftly toward the grain elevator's main entrance. 2 FBI agents took the back entrance while Beth and her deputies approached from the front. The bolt cutters made quick work of the chain on the door and they slipped inside. The smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies, fear, and something else Beth didn't want to identify. Their flashlight beams revealed a horrifying scene. The main floor of the building had been divided into small spaces with plywood walls. Each space was just large enough for a mattress and contained evidence of human occupation. "Police, FBI," Beth called out. "If anyone can hear me, we're here to help." At first there was only silence. Then they heard movement from the back of the building, shuffling feet and whispered voices. Beth's team found them in what had once been the building's office area. 11 people, mostly young women, but also 3 men, were huddled together in a room barely large enough for half that number. They were chained to the walls and floor, and their eyes showed the same terror Beth had seen in Katie's face. "It's okay," Beth said gently, holstering her weapon and raising her hands. "We're police officers. We're here to get you out of here." One of the women, who appeared to be the oldest, spoke up. "How do we know you're really police? They told us the police were working with them." Beth showed her badge and identification. "I'm Sheriff Rodriguez. 3 days ago, a woman named Katie escaped from these people and came to us for help. She told us about this place and about all of you. We're here because of her." At the mention of Katie's name, several of the victims started crying. "Katie got away?" one of them asked. "Is she really safe?" "She's safe," Beth confirmed. "And now you're going to be safe too." As Beth's team worked to free the victims from their restraints, reports came in from the other locations. The raids were successful across the board. A total of 26 victims had been rescued and 15 traffickers had been arrested. But as the victims were being loaded into ambulances for medical evaluation, Agent Walsh pulled Beth aside. "With disturbing news. We have a problem," Walsh said quietly. "Vincent Kozlov wasn't at any of the sites. Neither were 2 of his top lieutenants. Someone warned them." Beth felt her heart sink. Despite all their precautions, despite keeping the operation secret, somehow word had gotten out. The corruption Katie had mentioned was real, and it had cost them the chance to arrest the organization's leadership. "What does this mean for the victims?" Beth asked. "It means they're safe for now," Walsh replied. "But it also means the people who hurt them are still out there, and they might try to rebuild somewhere else." As dawn broke over the grain elevator, Beth watched the last of the victims being taken to the hospital. These people would need extensive medical care and psychological support, but they were alive and free. After months or years of captivity, they were finally going home. Katie arrived at the hospital later that morning to meet with the other survivors. Beth watched through a window as the young woman who had escaped 3 days earlier embraced people she had been separated from months ago. There were tears and laughter, grief for what they had lost and joy for what they had survived. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the trauma specialist who would be coordinating the victims' care, briefed Beth on their conditions. Physically, they're malnourished and show signs of long-term abuse, but nothing that won't heal with time and proper care. Psychologically, that's going to take much longer. "What do they need?" Beth asked. "Stability, safety, and time," Dr. Hayes replied. "Most of them haven't made their own choices about anything for months. It's going to take a while for them to trust that they're really free." Over the following days, the full scope of the trafficking operation became clear. Financial records seized during the raids showed that the organization had been operating for at least 5 years and had generated millions of dollars in illegal profits. They had bought properties, vehicles, and apparently people in positions of authority. The investigation into the corruption angle led to arrests of the county clerk and state trooper who had been taking payments from the traffickers. The prosecutor's office corruption case was still under investigation. "The good news," Agent Walsh told Beth a week after the raids, "is that we've completely dismantled their operation in this region. The bad news is that Kozlov and his inner circle got away and they might try to set up somewhere else." Beth nodded grimly. "What about the victims?" "They're all doing better than expected," Walsh replied. "Katie has become..." 6 months after that life-changing morning when Tom Bradley found Katie in his barn, the federal courthouse in the state capitol was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members of the trafficking victims. Today was the day that justice would finally be served. Katie sat in the witness chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap, facing the man who had bought and sold human beings like they were property. Vincent Kozlov had been captured 3 months earlier in a joint operation between the FBI and international law enforcement. His arrest had made headlines across the country. "Miss Rodriguez," the federal prosecutor said gently, "I know this is difficult, but can you tell the court about your experience in the defendant's organization?" Katie's voice was steady as she began to speak. The terrified young woman Tom had found that October morning was gone, replaced by someone who had found strength in survival and purpose in seeking justice. "I was held captive for 18 months, Katie said, looking directly at Kozlov. "During that time I was moved between 7 different locations, forced to work without pay, and threatened with death if I tried to escape." She went on to describe the systematic way the trafficking operation had functioned, the careful planning that went into breaking down victims' resistance, and the network of corruption that had allowed it to operate for so long. Judge Patricia Washington listened intently as Katie testified. This was the 3rd trafficking case the judge had presided over in her career, but none had involved such a large-scale operation or so many victims. "Miss Rodriguez," the defense attorney said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were paid for your work?" Katie's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained controlled. "I was given just enough food to stay alive and a place to sleep on a dirty mattress. If you call that payment, then I suppose I was paid." From the gallery, Tom and Linda Bradley watched with pride as Katie faced down her former captor. The young woman had been living with them for the past 4 months, slowly rebuilding her life with their support and the help of trauma counselors. The Bradleys had never planned to become advocates for trafficking victims, but that's exactly what had happened. Their quiet farm had become a safe haven for several of the survivors, and they had worked with social services to create a formal support program. "Katie has taught us more about courage than we ever knew was possible," Linda had told a reporter the previous week. "She survived something that would have broken most people, and now she's using that experience to help others." Sheriff Beth Rodriguez sat in the courtroom, thinking about how much her department had changed since the trafficking case. They had received federal funding to train all officers in recognizing signs of human trafficking, and they had created partnerships with social service agencies to better help victims. "We learned that this kind of crime can happen anywhere," Beth had explained to the State Sheriff's Association at their annual conference. "Rural areas aren't immune just because we think we know everyone in our communities." The investigation had revealed that the trafficking organization had deliberately targeted rural areas because law enforcement was less likely to be looking for their operations. They had counted on the assumption that human trafficking was an urban problem. As Katie finished her testimony, she looked toward the gallery where the other survivors were sitting. Many of them had also testified over the past week, adding their voices to the overwhelming evidence against Kozlov and his associates. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the trauma specialist who had been working with the survivors, had been amazed by their resilience. "What these people have accomplished in just 6 months is remarkable," she had told the court during her expert testimony. "They've not only survived unimaginable trauma, but they've found the strength to seek justice and help prevent other people from experiencing what they went through." Not all of the survivors had recovered at the same pace. Some were still struggling with the psychological effects of their captivity, and a few had returned to their home states to rebuild their lives with family support. But many had chosen to stay in the area where they had been rescued, forming a tight-knit community of mutual support. Agent Diana Walsh watched from the prosecution table as the case that had consumed her life for the past 6 months finally reached its conclusion. The investigation had led to arrests in 12 states and had revealed connections to international trafficking networks. This case has shown us that local law enforcement and federal agencies can work together effectively when we focus on our common goal of protecting victims. Walsh had testified before a congressional committee on human trafficking. "The cooperation we saw from the Sheriff's Department and local community was essential to our success. The corruption angle had also been fully resolved. The county clerk who had been taking payments from the traffickers had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The state trooper had received 10 years, and the prosecutor's office employee had received 12 years for actively helping the organization avoid law enforcement. These people betrayed their oath to serve and protect, Judge Washington had said during their sentencing. Their actions allowed serious crimes to continue and put innocent people at risk. As the final arguments concluded in Kozlov's trial, Katie reflected on how much her life had changed. The scared young woman who had hidden in Tom Bradley's barn had discovered an inner strength she never knew she possessed. She had enrolled in online college courses and was working toward a degree in social work with a focus on helping trafficking victims. Her goal was to establish a nonprofit organization that would provide long-term support for survivors. I want to make sure that other people who escape from situations like mine have somewhere to go and people who understand what they've been through. Katie had explained to a group of social workers the previous month. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Vincent Kozlov was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy, human trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His associates received sentences ranging from 25 years to life, depending on their level of involvement in the organization. The judge made it clear that these crimes would be met with the full force of the law. Human trafficking is modern slavery, Judge Washington said as she imposed the sentences. It reduces human beings to commodities and inflicts suffering that extends far beyond the immediate victims. This court will not tolerate such crimes in our jurisdiction. Outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Katie spoke to the crowd of reporters who had followed the case from the beginning. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over, she said. I thought I would never be free, never be safe, never have control over my own future again. But I learned that there are good people in the world who will fight for justice and who will help you rebuild when everything seems hopeless. She looked toward Tom and Linda Bradley, who were standing nearby with several other survivors and their supporters. The Bradley family saved my life not just by finding me that morning, but by opening their home and their hearts to help me heal. Sheriff Rodriguez and Agent Walsh and all the law enforcement officers involved in this case showed me that there are people who will fight for justice even when it's difficult and dangerous. Katie paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. But, most importantly, I learned that surviving trauma doesn't mean just getting through it. It means using that experience to help prevent other people from going through the same thing. That's what all of us survivors are committed to doing. The Bradley farm had indeed become a symbol of hope and healing. What had started as a horrifying discovery in an old barn had evolved into a community effort to support trafficking survivors and educate people about recognizing and preventing these crimes. Tom had installed better lighting around all the farm buildings and had worked with the sheriff's department to create a network of safe houses for people fleeing dangerous situations. Linda had taken additional training in trauma care and had become a certified advocate for crime victims. We never expected our lives to change like this, Tom told a group of farmers at an agricultural conference. But sometimes you're called to do something bigger than yourself. We've learned that ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference in fighting crime and helping victims. The trafficking case had also led to changes in state law. Legislators had passed new bills increasing penalties for human trafficking and requiring training for law enforcement, healthcare workers, and social service providers to recognize signs of trafficking. Katie's courage in coming forward and testifying has led to systemic changes that will help protect other potential victims, the state attorney general had said at the bill signing ceremony. As evening settled over the Bradley farm that night, Katie sat on the porch with Tom and Linda, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The peace and safety of this place still felt almost miraculous to her after everything she had endured. "What's next?" Linda asked, bringing out a pitcher of iced tea.